Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Ilya Somin, professor of law at George Mason University. Professor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
President Trump has been publicly pro-tariff since before he was president, all the way back to at least the 1980s. He's been saying the United States has been getting ripped off by other countries for years now, and even on the campaign trail leading up to his second term, he promised tariffs. So it should really come as no surprise that on April 2nd, he unveiled what he called Liberation Day, his sweeping tariff policy. You and the Liberty Justice Center filed a lawsuit against these tariffs. So to start off the conversation, can you lay out your case?
Yeah, our case is very simple. The president has usurped the powers of Congress on a massive, gargantuan scale. What he's doing is illegal and unconstitutional, and also hugely damaging to United States and world economies. So we intend to ask the courts to stop it, as we have done in the lawsuit that we filed on Monday.
So you're really not mincing words here. You're saying what he's done with these tariffs is unconstitutional. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 as a reason to impose these tariffs. And you're saying that's not right. Can you explain that case a little bit?
Yeah, our case is very simple. This law, known as IEEPA for short, doesn't even mention tariffs. Therefore, the power to impose tariffs simply is not one of the powers that is granted by that law. Even if hypothetically it was granted, there are still multiple other problems with the president's position. One is that that law can only be invoked when there is a national emergency. There is no emergency over bilateral trade deficits, because an emergency by its nature is a sudden, unexpected crisis. These kinds of bilateral trade deficits with various countries, by the administration's own admission, have existed for decades. They're not an emergency. They're not even a crisis at all, or a problem at all, because there's nothing wrong with having a situation where we buy more goods from another country than they buy from us, any more than there's some kind of problem in my life if I have a trade deficit with my local supermarket, because they virtually never buy anything that I produce, whereas I buy a lot of things from them, but it's not a problem. In addition, even if hypothetically we agree that there is an emergency, still, according to the law, that emergency has to involve an extraordinary and unusual threat from abroad to U.S. economy or security. There's nothing extraordinary or unusual about bilateral trade deficits. They happen all the time, and they're not a threat at all, because they're not actually harmful to the economy. There's nothing actually wrong with them. There's economists across the political spectrum who will say that, some of whom are likely to file a brief supporting our case. So that's another level on which there's no authorization for this. And in addition, the Supreme Court has said in several decisions in recent years that when the executive claims the power to decide a major question, that is a major economic or political or social issue, they can only do that if Congress has clearly delegated the power to them. And here, there's just no such clear delegation whatsoever. It's not clear if there's even ambiguous delegation here. And obviously, there's also no question that what's going on here is a major question. We're talking about the biggest tax increase in Americans in several decades, the biggest trade war since the Great Depression, imposing tariffs massively on almost every country in the world. So if this is not a major question, I do not know what is. And then finally, assume somehow the statute does authorize what the president is doing. In that event, it would be unconstitutional, because there's limits to how much legislative power Congress can delegate to the president, and the power to set tariffs and trade policy is specifically enumerated as a congressional power in Article 1 of the Constitution. Admittedly, the Supreme Court's precedent on exactly what are the limits of delegation are somewhat fuzzy, but if this is not an excessive delegation, I do not know what is, because essentially, if the president's position is correct, then what he's claiming is that he can use IEEPA to impose tariffs on any country in any amount at any time for almost any reason he wants. If that is not an unconstitutional delegation of legislative power, then nothing is.
You laid out quite a few arguments there. It sounds like you think this is an open and shut case. So I do want to discuss the timeline, because April 2nd, that's when Liberation Day was, as President Trump described it. He unveiled his tariff plan. April 9th, he largely paused the reciprocal tariffs. There's still that baseline 10% on most nations, and he has since ratcheted up the trade war with China. You filed the lawsuit earlier this week, so can you discuss where that lawsuit is now and what are the next steps?
The lawsuit is before the Court of International Trade. Within the next few days, we will file a motion for remedies. We are going to most likely seek a preliminary injunction, which would prevent the tariffs from being implemented while the case continues. We might also file for a temporary restraining order, which would impose that constraint even faster. It's obviously will be up to the court to determine whether they do that or not. We think as a matter of text and history and the meaning of the Constitution, we have an open and check case. It's very strong. Obviously, they might be able to sort of try to get the courts to ignore the text and say, well, you should defer to the executive anyway. But we hope to persuade the court that that would be a very dangerous path. It would be enormous and harmful concentration of power that's totally at odds with the text of the Constitution and of the law, and would create lots of practical problems, such as that one man could start a trade war with any country at any time, whenever he feels like, which is totally contrary to what the founding fathers wanted in a separation of power system, and also would be extremely dangerous to the U.S. and world economies. So it's possible that if we're successful, we would be able to get a judicial ruling that would block implementation of these tariffs quickly, but it's also possible that there will be many months before there is a complete resolution to the case. I won't lie to you about that.
Let's talk about that a little more, because at Forbes, we've talked to small businesses that these tariffs will impact, and the impacts will be devastating. You're representing a couple of companies where they're saying these tariffs will absolutely devastate our business. If you file the preliminary... Five, yes. If you file the preliminary injunction, would that immediately stop the tariffs? What does the timeline look there? When would that take effect?
A lot depends on the discretion of the court. So people listening, I cannot promise you that we're going to get you immediate relief tomorrow. We would like to do it as fast as possible, but obviously it's in the hands of the court rather than in my hands or that of our clients. But we will seek a preliminary injunction and possibly a temporary restraining order. If we are successful, one or both could be issued within the next few weeks even, or even sooner than that. But obviously we can't be certain ahead of time that we will be. Also, there might be a question about sort of what's the scope of the injunction. We would seek a so-called nationwide injunction that would shut down the entire system of Liberation Day tariffs, but it's possible that a court could decide to grant a more limited injunction that's more focused on particular industries or trade with particular countries and the like. We think we have good reasons why the injunction should be universal in scope and not just limited in that way, but courts do have considerable discretion in how they grant injunctions and what their scope is.
The tariff rates are at the highest we've seen them since pre-Great Depression. As you stated, you're representing 5 businesses that are greatly impacted by these tariffs. How are the tariffs impacting them specifically? Can you tell us that?
So these are businesses in various different sectors of the economy, ranging from wine imports to fishing equipment and other matters, as was explained at the Liberty Justice Center website in more detail. But the basic story is that all of them import various products or components from abroad that either cannot be acquired in the United States or can only be acquired at much greater cost. And also, in some cases, the products are unique, as in the case of our wine client who imports wine from, I think, 5 different continents around the world. And some of the, I'm no wine expert myself. I'm not much of a connoisseur, I have to admit. But people who do appreciate and understand fine wine, they know that there's distinctive tastes that come from particular wineries that simply can't be replicated by a substitute. So they would suffer great harm. And there's similar stories for other clients with respect to the products or inputs that they import. And if you look at firms around the country in a vast range of different industries, you will see similar stories that there's a reason why we import these products that has to do with price and quality and other matters. And if we block their importation or make it extremely costly with tariffs, we're all going to be poorer. We're going to be paying more for the products that we consume. We're going to have less variety and choice. And many American jobs will also be threatened because many Americans, like the employees of some of our clients, work for businesses that depend on imports for the things that they produce.
I've spoken with economists, other small businesses, and while the White House is saying that these tariffs are to help Main Street, now it's Main Street's turn, not Wall Street's, these small businesses are saying that's really not the case. But I want to read something from the White House. White House spokesman Harrison Fields said this in a statement to CNN. Never Trumpers will always oppose him, but President Trump is standing up for Main Street by putting an end to our trading partners, especially China, exploiting the U.S. His plan levels the playing field for businesses and workers to address our country's national emergency of chronic trade deficits. What do you make of that reaction?
It's utter claptrap. Ask economists across the political spectrum, left, right, they will tell you the same thing. You're not helping Main Street by making them poorer, by raising their prices of their goods and so forth, and also by, in many cases, costing them their jobs and harming them in all sorts of other ways. And that's not even to mention the retaliation that other countries are going to impose against our exports that will still further damage Main Street. One of the things that experts and economists across the political spectrum agree on is that free trade is beneficial and protectionism, with perhaps extremely rare exceptions, is harmful. And I will add, if all of this is about China, then why is he tariffing the other 179 nations that are on this tariff list, including ones that impose no tariffs at all on the United States, such as Switzerland and Israel? If I'm an ever-Trumper, it is for good reason. It is because he has a history of cruel and unjust and harmful policies and abuses of power like this one.
Professor, one thing we can say for certain is that there's been whiplash with these tariff policies. After the reciprocal tariffs went into effect, they were largely paused for 90 days, but that 10% baseline remains for most countries. The tit for tat with China has been ratcheted up to, at this point, as you and I are sitting here, as high as 245%. Does this pause do anything to the lawsuit?
No. First of all, as you mentioned, there are still 10% tariffs on almost every country in the world. That by itself is the highest tariff schedule in close to 100 years or more. And obviously, there's also the trade war with China as well that's still going on without pause. But even the rest is not permanently ended. It's only paused for 90 days. And that's still a violation of the law for him to say it's going to be in place 90 days from now. And more fundamentally, one of the problems with concentrating power over this in the hands of one man is that he can constantly change things anytime he wants if he has that power, and that eliminates the certainty and clarity that businesses and consumers and just even ordinary Americans they need to be able to plan their affairs. Think about if you're investing in a factory but you don't know what the tariff rate is going to be tomorrow. That's a severe deterrent to making that investment. If you're signing contracts for delivery of goods, many of which by their nature have to be advanced contracts for commitments over a period of months or years, once again, you need some clarity and certainty on what are the prices you're going to be paying. And if you can't have that, that severely damages the world and American economies and raises prices for consumers and even cutting off access to some important goods almost completely.
This is not the first lawsuit on President Trump's tariffs. There was another one on other IEEPA tariffs from February over President Trump's China tariffs there. Do you think that this is eventually going to make its way to the Supreme Court?
I think it's possible. We'll have to see how our lawsuit works out. And also, there's two other significant lawsuits that have been filed. The one you mentioned, also one in Montana filed by members of the Blackfeet Nation, a Native American tribe. And I have heard today the announcement the state of California is going to file a lawsuit challenging at least some of the IEEPA tariffs. So I think there's a decent chance this will get to the Supreme Court. We'll just have to see about that.
You're arguing that President Trump is exceeding his authority. He's overstepping the Constitution. Legally, what do you think are some of the implications here when it comes to presidential powers?
So we think that he's going way beyond the legitimate scope of presidential power. And if he's allowed to get away with it, we will have one-man rule over this vast realm of the American economy. That's unconstitutional, but it's also dangerous for the reasons that I've already mentioned, that we don't want one man, if he wakes up on the wrong side of his bed, to be able to start a global trade war anytime he feels like it. Even if you trust President Trump with this authority, which frankly I do not, think about, do you trust the next Democratic president with it? Do you think Joe Biden would do a great job if he had this power, or Kamala Harris, or whoever the next president is going to be? To my mind, no one person, whether Democrat or Republican, can be trusted with this much power over our lives and our economy. And in fact, the founding fathers deliberately designed the Constitution to prevent that from happening.
Professor, as we see the lawsuit make its way through next steps, I hope you come back on and join me. Thank you so much for the conversation. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you for having me.